My name is Dave Robertson. I'm here to empower you through knowledge and motivation, and I'm not a professor. Let's get to learning. And today we are having a live stream about this book, Beauty is a Wound by Kurniawan. And as you can probably tell by my voice, I am having a bit of a cold. I'm not in the best health, and that is also why I'm just showing up here, no makeup and with wet hair, because I want to get this done, and I don't like wearing makeup when I'm sick, and we can just pretend like the robe is just inspired by the main character, Debbie Ayo. So anyways, even though I'm sick, don't doubt me. I have read this book through and through, and I'm ready to break it down for you. So welcome to book club. So, Beauty is a Wound is a book by the Indonesian author Kurniawan about Indonesia from the beginning of World War II, or like a little bit before World War II, from the Japanese invasion when Indonesia was still under Dutch rule, to the post-colonial era, or post-independence era, if you will. And what it's about, like, literally, is a prostitute named Debbie Ayu who arises from the grave after being dead for 21 years, which I think is brilliant, because her being dead for 21 years makes so that we're able to follow a longer part of the history of both the people in the book and the country itself. Sorry, I have a little cough drop in my mouth. Anyways, so the book is about the country, so it's about, violence and political turmoil and war, but also how this affects people, how the politics affect the people themselves, and how they sort of turn against one another because of the conditions they're living in. And it follows both love and betrayal, and sort of the flip sides of human interactions and human relations, and a lot of the conflict is between families as well. One of the things I find very charming about the book is that even though it's about history and everything, you still have that really Indonesian element where the book is written in magical realism. So even though it's a realistic book, you still have elements like Dewi Ayu rising from the grave, you have ghosts, you have spells, curses, and I think that really adds to the story and just gives us the feeling that it's really written from a local point of view, and how a person would actually tell that story if it were to happen in real life, especially in the time. And the book is, even though it's very about the country itself and very long, not long form, but about a long period, it's still very relationship based. So I think the best way to start is to start breaking down the characters. So first of all, we have Debbie Ayu, who is, like I said, basically the main character for most part of the book, and she is the prostitute who rises from the grave, but she's also the matriarch of her family, and she's basically a matriarch from a young age. She is a super strong, witty, and fierce character, super loyal, and she really just has this incredible strength and also wit about her from childhood on. We'll go more into that, but also an important thing to note is that even though her name is Debbie Ayu, and even though she feels extremely strong ties to Indonesia, she's actually 75% Dutch, which is part of the reason for a lot of what happens in the book, and actually why she ends up as a prostitute as well. And she has a very tragic life, but she doesn't really read as a tragic person. And she has 4 daughters, but 3 that come at the same time, and then 1 that comes along well after. So first of all, we'll take the first 3 daughters. So the eldest is Alamanda, and she is born at a brothel when Debbie Ayu is first forced into prostitution. She is continually raped by Japanese soldiers. We don't know who Alamanda's father is. We do know that he is Japanese. And so she's born from a teenage mom and surrounded by these other teenage girls who really adore her. She's like the only light they have. And she really loves toying around with men, especially since she knows that men hurt the generation before her. Unfortunately, she ends up getting burned pretty badly, but yet she's a romantic at heart. And the second daughter is named Adinda, and she shares a lot of the same traits as Alamanda, but she's clearly a middle child. She wants more attention. And she's very kind-hearted and very warm and very loyal, but also a person who wants what she wants. She's very adamant about it, and she gets it. She also wants to flirt around with men, but she ends up settling down pretty quickly once she finds her match. Yeah, she's, like I said, tenacious and goal-oriented. And the third is Maya Devi, who's raised basically as a youngest child, since she's the youngest of the first three. And she's just very kind, very sweet, attentive, loving. Again, probably a typical youngest child, except for that she's not very attention-grabbing whatsoever. She's pretty opposite. She cares a lot about others. And then we have the men who end up marrying these daughters. First of all, we have Shadansho. Shadansho really shows us like the Indonesian part of the story, in that he's a guerrilla soldier, and then he becomes a very integral part in the like the real army in Indonesia once they are established as independent. Unfortunately, though, he also shows the downside of this war, as he is a very avid sexual assaulter. And that is how he ends up marrying Alamanda, the older sister. He sexually assaults her and then sort of coerces her into marriage. He also has a love of wild dogs, which is interesting. Then the second man is Comrade Clivon. Now, Clivon shows a very different side again of the Indonesian society, as he is one of the people who are very adamant, obviously, Comrade Clivon, about communism. He flip-flops a little bit. He's very young for a lot of the book, but in general, he is a communist. And so we see a lot of the political backdrop in the story through him. And he actually ends up marrying Adinda, although he has a long-standing relationship to Alamanda, and they sort of in love throughout the book. The third man is Maman Gendeng, and just as Comrade Clivon, Maman Gendeng also has a very intricate relationship to Devi Ayu's family, and has several relations within it. He is basically, he again shows another part of the society. He is a gangster. And he's extremely brutal, but he's extremely brutal outwardly, and he's actually a very nice family man, and he always treats Devi Ayu and her children very kindly, and he ends up marrying the youngest sister, the youngest of the first three, Maya Devi. And we really see the difference between this brutal gangster and army man Shadansho, and that Shadansho is a rapist, whilst Maman Gendeng marries Maya Devi when she is 12, and he doesn't consummate the relationship until years later. So he clearly sees a lot of value in actually treating your spouse nicely and just being a generally kind person. And because of that, they probably have one of the most beautiful relationships in the book, honestly. So, what is... Sorry, I am just looking for something. It's harder when you live stream, you know, you still have to, like, get things done, but then you, have to, like, get things done. Like that. Okay, yes. Then we have the grandchildren of Devi Ayu, and they are born basically all at the same time, like within probably a month from each other. So we have who is from the oldest sister, Alamanda, and her husband, Shadansho. Rangaris from Maya Devi and Maman Gendeng. And then the only boy is Kursan, who is born to Adinda and Clivon, or Comrade Clivon, if you will. And we also see, like, this book is so beautifully created that everything really has a connection and all of the groups of people play off each other. So in this little trio, we have I, who's really like the protector, kind of like if she was the oldest, you know, she is the protector of especially Rangaris, who's called Rangaris the Beautiful. And she is a beautiful person who has something wrong with her head. So she basically acts like a child. She really portrays the like innocence of children and the exploitation we see a lot in the book, and she's just a perfect example of that. So she is the victim, if you will, which leaves Kursan, who's very manipulative and very about getting what he wants, which leaves him obviously as the perpetrator. So you have the protector, the perpetrator, and the victim all in the three grandchildren. We'll go into what happened more when we get to the summary, obviously. And then Devi Ayu also has a fourth daughter whom she calls Beauty, but who in reality is extremely unattractive and horrid, kind of like a monster. As Devi Ayu tried to abort Beauty 8 times, as she got pregnant with her when she was 52, and she didn't want her, and she didn't want to birth another woman into the world just to have her be exploited and hurt by the world around her. So when she figured out that she wasn't able to abort her maid, I'm blinking a little, Rosanna was like, just pray for her to be extremely ugly so that no one would ever want to assault her. So that is what she does, and she like goes into detail, like, God, please make her be this, make her be that, and make her nose be like when you plug in something, a plug, and her skin is like a burn victim. Like everything is just, she just isn't attractive, and that is horrible for her. It's like a curse, but for Devi Ayu, it's a blessing. Even though Beauty is so ugly that Devi Ayu herself actually doesn't want to look at her. And so she ends up being taken care of by Rosanna. As I mentioned, Devi Ayu's maid, who's actually deaf. And after, or actually, I'll go into that in the summary. Yeah, these are just a few of the characters. There are so many characters in this book, but these are like the main. And then also, I like not giving all of the information, not everything in the story, not all the characters, because I really want you to read the book. And it might seem like I'm giving you a lot of information, but honestly, there's still a lot to be found in this book, so you'll still be able to be surprised and everything, so just still read it. Yes, there are spoilers, but you don't know everything. So, summary. So yeah, like I said, Devi Ayu, it starts with, well, first of all, it starts with like, she rises from the grave, but then we go into her story. So she finds out she's pregnant at 52, she doesn't want the baby, and after she has the baby and doesn't want anything to do with it, she decides she wants to die. She says, like, to Rosanna, I lived for 50 years, I've had 4 daughters. If I live for 50 more, I swear to God, I'll have 4 more. So she decides to die, and she's super dramatic about it, which I love. She dresses herself in these garments they have for dead people, but she still gets up every day to eat and to go get dressed and everything, but then like at the end of the day she returns, like swaddles herself for death, and she even has this like powder that you put on dead bodies to preserve them. She puts that on herself. She's just super ready to die, and in 12 days she dies. And then we follow her from her childhood. So her parents turned out to be half siblings. Her grandfather had an Indonesian mistress. Like I said, they were Dutch colonizers. So you have one of her parents who is Dutch, and then the other who has the same father but a different mother, which is the Indonesian mistress. So Devi is 25% Indonesian. And her parents, when they're made, they kind of just bolt, so she's raised by her grandparents. And unfortunately, this means that even though Devi is very, like, she loves Indonesia and everything, when the war, like, really breaks out, when you realize, oh shit, these Japanese people aren't our friends, they're actually just here on a hostile mission, and her grandparents, or her grandmother, her grandfather's dead, her grandmother leaves, and she really wants Debbie to come with. She's like, no, someone has to look after the house, it's gonna be me, just me, it's gonna be fine, my name's Debbie Ayu, obviously I'm native, but, like, obviously she's not. So she's rounded up to go to a concentration camp. She's there for a couple of years with a lot of other women and children. But then after a couple of years, she is rounded up again and sent to be a forced prostitute for Japanese soldiers at a brothel run by an Indonesian woman. And then, like I said, she has her first baby, Alamanda, there. And then after the war ends, she decides, first of all, she doesn't want to go to the Netherlands because she has no ties there. And secondly, she wants her house back. She loves her house. Her house has been taken over by a family of someone in the guerrilla army. And she decides, like, no, I'm going to get it back. So she gets the madam at the brothel to lend her some money. And she has some hidden riches there. And she gets her house back and she starts raising a kid, and she decides to keep working as a prostitute at the brothel. And then obviously she has her other children and everything. So onto the story of her children. First of all, Clivan, or Comrade Clivan, falls in love with Alamanda, the oldest sister. And Alamanda falls in love with Clivan as well. And it's very fun for everyone because they've been, like, making their way through town, both of them, but now they're settling down with each other, and sort of like a dream pair, but also they're kind of boring, so people are like, oh, whatever. But the thing is that Shidansho also falls in love with Alamanda, and Clement has to go to university because he's very intelligent, so he leaves. And while he leaves, Alamanda is sort of toying around with Shidansho, but Shidansho doesn't appreciate being toyed around with. So he sexually assaults her and forces her into marriage. And she has to break Clement's heart, and she doesn't want to say what happened. Only Deviayu gets it because he asked Deviayu for Alamanda's hand in marriage, and he also assaulted Deviayu. And she can just tell right away, like, he assaulted her, but she can't do anything about it. And then Adinda, she's been sort of jealous about this whole Clevan situation, so she decides to go after Clevan, and she procures him. And then Deviayu is having a relationship to Maman Gendeng, like I said, the gangster, but she sees, like, what is happening with her oldest daughters, and she's very afraid that will happen with her youngest as well, so she just wants her to get married. So she actually... it's funny, she makes Maman Gendeng marry Maya Devi, which she's like, okay, that is insane because we are lovers and your child is 12. She's like, oh my god, it's fine, we can still do it on the down low. And they do for a while, but then he decides he wants to be faithful, so he just goes years without sex because he doesn't want to sleep with a child, because he's not like Shidansho, you know, who would do anything. Yeah, and then, like, I'm going into very broad strokes here, but that's because I want you to read the book. So, they all have kids, and their kids are best friends, they're like their own little kid gang, but drama, because, Krisan is in love with Ai. Ai is, like I said, the protector, the calm one, she's intelligent. Clewan, nothing special about him. He just has daddy issues. Honestly, who doesn't? But yeah, he's super in love with Ai. But he also really wants to bed Rengaris because Rengaris is so hot. Oh, yeah, both of these are his cousins. But, like, yeah, one cousin is so perfect. The other one is so attractive. Everyone wants her. He wants her. So he makes this plan. So basically he ends up sexually assaulting and killing Rengaris, or Rengaris the Beautiful as she's known. And he was planning to marry Ai, and everyone would have been happy, their whole family wanted it, but now that he's killed her and she doesn't know, she just knows that Rengaris is gone, Ai loves Rengaris so much that she dies of a heartbreak. But luckily for Kursan, her ghost comes back and he's able to profess his love to her, but still, she's gone. And then, I don't even remember what happens, but Kursan also dies, basically. I don't think he killed himself, because his father killed himself. I don't think he would do that also. But I do know that he dies. Okay. Because that's sort of like the point, like everyone they love dies. Yeah, like I said, a lot more happens in this book. There are a lot more characters as well, so don't feel like you know everything. These are in broad strokes, like what is happening with a family and then what is happening with a country. So rise and fall of communism. Well, first of all, Japanese invasion, World War II, guerrilla turning straight, rise and fall of communism, and then just trying to build a country and build a culture, and just like Norway did in the 1800s, like building everything from scratch. Basically, you have something, but like you need something to separate yourself from everything else. And that is what they're working on, and they're really working on who should be in charge of this, who should be in charge of that. And I think it's funny, like, how the girls end up marrying these guys who are all like super involved in politics, but on all different ends, and who all have infighting, like extreme infighting. Like Shadansho, Mom and Ginding hate each other in the beginning, and Shadansho also really hates Kluwan because Kluwan is a communist, and also his wife actually loves Kluwan. There's infighting because of familial structures, but also because of the country. And just like hands down, this is the only time I read about war in like a non-fiction book and not been bored. So what are the themes of the book? I think a big theme, and it's funny because this book, this gorgeous, gorgeous book, is written by a man. But he wrote perfectly about womanhood and its strengths and vulnerabilities. Obviously, the title of the book is Beauty is a Wound, and what Devi Ayu means with this is that being beautiful is not just a strength, it's also like a liability. Like, it makes people want something from you and they're willing to hurt you to get it. And then obviously another big theme is politics and how it and then how it impacts everyday life. And it's so interesting to see, like, even this is like a small fisher village in Indonesia, and everything that happens globally is really like hitting it and impacting it in different ways, whether it's World War II or colonialism or communism. It's impacting Halamanda, which is the village. Then also family, both in like sisterhood. The end of the book is sort of like, okay, we have each other, sisters, you know, and love. But then also generational trauma and generational curses. And this one, like I said, magical realism, so the curse is real. But it's very, very interesting to see how like these themes, even though Devi Ayu is such a hardworking mother, she works hard to support her family and then also to guide her family. And still, the same things keep happening over and over again, even with her ugly daughter. Oh yeah, I think her son is killed. Anyways, even with Beauty, she's, you know, she's not, even she gets it a little. Not in the same way, but she definitely is vulnerable in her own way. Hi. So yeah, history and politics. We see from Japanese invasion, post-independence era. And we see like how this impacts everyone, and like just the feeling in the beginning of betrayal from like all these Japanese people they thought were their friends who ended up being spies, all of these things that just impact daily life. Or like, we also see a big thing which maybe should be talking more about oh my god, what's the word? Industrialization, but also capitalism. How like these people, first of all, after all this turmoil, after invasions and wars and systematic rapes, they still have to be like, oh yeah, now Shidansho and his are like coming with their gigantic fishing boats and ruining our livelihood, taking all of the fish, ruining the ecosystem, and just we don't have a living. You know, it's because of capitalism, but also just because of selfishness and douchebags. Then also, violence and trauma, its lasting impact on persons and on a society, and kind of a level of trust that just isn't there anymore, you know? It's, yeah. It shows the brutality of enemies, like the Japanese soldiers, but also of friends, you know? Like I said, there is, like, Shidansho isn't an outsider. He is an Indonesian guerrilla soldier and then a Indonesian, like, leader in the army. And even he sexually assaults the women in Holomanda. It's not just the foreign, like the Dutch or the Japanese. Devi Ayu has this horrible moment, probably one of the worst ones in the book, where she realizes that now that the Japanese have been fought off, the guerrilla soldiers, the Indonesians, are coming in and systematically raping them. There's just no release. Then also you have a big theme of love and betrayal, and this sort of goes into that as well in a grander scale of being betrayed by the people of your country, but then also within the family itself, which is a representation of the country. Obviously you see like Kursan loves Ai, but he can't help but betray her in that he not only has relations to Rangaris, but also actually murders her and thus takes away the person that she truly loves or that she's living for in a way that she's protecting. And this happens again and again. I don't think there's any character who hasn't betrayed someone in this book, but in the end they also still love each other. And it's very interesting to see how all of the characters, no matter how horrible they may seem, all have this very like deep level of love and just have issues that they're trying to work out. Because yeah, we have sort of good and bad characters in this book, but all of them are so leveled also. And that's one of the things I really love about this book, honestly. Yeah, obviously gender and sexuality. We've talked about womanhood with its struggles, but then also it's not just a thing of being vulnerable. This is also the middle of the 19th century, so women are trying to figure out who they are in society, and then the men are also trying to figure out what is my role now that society has really changed. Not only gender-wise, but in general, there's a lot of identity issues in this book. You see Clivon going from not communist to communist to capitalist to communist again. Shidansho really struggles with the guerrilla war coming to an end and actually having to be like a real soldier, and he's offered all of these big positions, but he doesn't want to leave home. And in a way, he just wants to keep fighting in the jungle. That's why he kind of loves his petty squabbles. Maman Yindeng also really struggles with this. He has always been a man who is terrifying to the locals, and has always been like a brutal gangster, but then he sort of switches and he wants to be a family man more than anything, but he just doesn't really know how to make the jump. It's fun because there is a lot of focus on womanhood, but I think a lot of the focus on manhood, or how manhood comes into play here, is how it is so hard for them to grasp or find their identities when things are in such turmoils around them, whilst the women, even though they are like maybe thinking about working or studying or whatever, in general have a much more firmer grasp on their own self. But I think that is a lot because of Devi Ayu's upbringing as well, or how she has brought them up, rather. And like I said, you have the element of magical realism, which, in my opinion, just really, just really shows how much this is a local story. And even though, yes, it's hilarious and it's modern and it's about history, in the end, it's about a small village in Indonesia, and it is super Indonesian in that way. And then over to my review. Okay, this is extremely embarrassing because I have a degree in history and I've spent last year studying idea history or intellectual history. But this is somehow the first book I read cover to cover that is not just that is Indonesian or Asian, but that is non-Western. And I'm 23, so I don't know how that happened. I think maybe because I've been so obsessed with reading through like classic literature, like Gothic books and stuff, or classic in Western sense. Or maybe because at my university, like my professors said themselves, they don't have anyone who specializes in anything other than Western culture. Even so, I screwed the pooch on that one, and like going forward, I'm gonna put a lot more focus on reading non-Western books as well. Especially because this is one of, like in so many ways, one of the best books I've read. It is super hilarious. It is exciting. Sometimes it's even beautiful no matter what is happening. It was very informative for me as well. Like I didn't know a lot about Indonesia at all, and I guess I haven't read much about how like small places outside of Norway have tackled World War II either. And I actually bought this book 5 years ago, and it's been like on my to-read list, but like I said, I've been focusing a lot about classics, but I can't understand how it's been like lying there. Like it's so beautiful. Also, every time I've seen it, I'm like, I have to read this soon. Yeah. So, one of the things especially that I loved about this book was the main character. She is by no means a non-flawed character, but she's just incredibly strong and intelligent. She's just not afraid, and she's, like I said 1,000 times, super witty. A lot of the humor really comes from her in the book. And she's like just a textbook matriarch. And I love how her point of view makes it easier to read through these horrible things, because no matter what is happening to her, I think she experienced every horrible thing a woman can experience, you know, with war and sexual assault, concentration camp, losing your children, all of this. But she always, even though she really, really brings this into it and we see it clearly, she also always makes fun, and she's so strong and so witty that she sort of gets us through it. So I find that very interesting, and it really helps the book. And like I said, this is the first time I actually enjoyed something that is about the war, because like it's things are always darker when they're real, and also I've had to read a lot about like the darkest sides of World War II for my studies. So I usually, when I see that something is about war, I'm like, oh no, not for me. It's funny, when I read the backside of this book, I somehow misinterpreted it, so I didn't actually know that it was in World War II. And if I did, I wouldn't have bought it, so I'm super happy about that. And now I have enjoyed a book that partially takes place in World War II. But I must say also, it was obviously more interesting for me to read about it from the perspective of a young woman. Yeah, I think the most brilliant thing in this book truly is how Kurniawan is able to write about the darkest subjects, all of the darkest subjects, even incest and bestiality, in a book, and still have such a humor that we are able to, not even that you have humor, but without us distancing ourselves to it. Like, we are in it, we see how terrible it is, there's no distance, but it's still livable, and he still makes it funny. Like, I am a crier, and I didn't cry in the book. And that is not because it wasn't beautiful. It's not because I wasn't reading about horrible things. It's because WIU every time I thought, oh my god, I'm gonna cry, she made me laugh. And Kurniawan wrote that and made me laugh. Oh yeah, and also being able to enjoy some generational book, very interesting to me, but he wove all the characters together, and I think it also is brilliant that WIU comes back at the end, and it gives us an added level of reflection to what is happening and makes us care more about the other characters as well, because the most fleshed out character here is WIU, and we care the most about WIU. So being able to tie everything that happens with the children and the grandchildren back to her, and then even having her parents return at the end of the book, and again tying them to Devi, makes us care a lot more about the other characters. And also, there are a lot of side characters in this book in Holomunda, because Holomunda, the village, is basically a character in this book, and we need to get to know it. So you get to know the family of the person who digs the graves to everyone and stuff like that, and having these little side quests as well makes everything so much realer to us. Yeah, there are a lot of first times for me with this book. It's the first time reading an Indonesian book, an Asian book, like I said, a non-Western book, and then in a whole book with the war, except for one book that I was forced to read at school, but that wasn't even the war, it was the Afghan war. From the view of Norwegian 18-year-olds. It was also interesting. But yeah, I also usually don't even read books from the beginning of the 2000s, which is really interesting. I hurt my foot and had to be home, so I thought, you know what, I'll tackle some books from the 21st century, see what's happening in my own time, and then obviously this was on top list, so serendipitous. I usually don't even read dramas either from our time, or anything that I think will make me sad, because yeah, I cry a lot over books. But all these first times and all these things that would have made me not read it, I'm so glad I did. And even though I bought this book 5 years ago, I feel like I read it at the exact right time, and I'm really happy about that. So I hope you enjoyed the summary, character overview, themes, my review, everything. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though I am sick. Donna enjoyed it, I think, but she's getting kind of tired, and that was all I had for today. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you soon. Please read the book.